Yeah, Marie, you're good.
Okay, great. Let's go. Um, so it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote presenter, Rabindra or Rabi Ratan, also known as Rabindra Roth in Second Life. He will be presenting toward Professor Hero Protagonist Inside from Teaching in VR and Research on Virtual Meetings. Dr. Ratan is an associate professor and AT&T endowed chair at Michigan State University, Department of Media and Information. He is also the director of the Social and Psychological Approaches to Research on Technology Interaction Effects, or SPARTY, lab. He is an affiliated faculty member of the MSU Department of Psychology, the MSU College of Education's program in educational psychology and educational technology, and the MSU Center for Gender in the Global Context. Dr. Ratan conducts social and psychological research on the effects of human technology interaction, focusing on how media technologies, for example, XR, VR, AR, and MR, avatars, video games, agents influence meaningful outcomes, for example, equity, well-being, motivation, across societal contexts, for example, education, health, and industry. He is particularly interested in the Proteus effect, i.e., avatar characteristics influencing user behaviors, AI, human AI interaction, gender stereotypes in gaming, and virtual meetings, in addition to conducting research on virtual reality. So please join me in welcoming Professor Ratan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Marie. Appreciate it. Yeah, sorry, my lab name is a bit of a mouthful. I assume everyone can hear me okay. So, and I'm seeing some chat here. Excellent. So I'm assuming everyone is comfortable using chat. Can I just ask a favor if you're able to just type into the nearby chat here, like, what is your a connection to this conference? I'm assuming many of you are educators or have been at some point in your lives. So are you currently working in a school district, or are you working in industry? Okay, I'm seeing a publisher, educator and researcher, builder and stuff, college teacher, archivist. Um, all right, recently retired, library staff, mathematics professor. Okay, this is so good to know. Thank you. I really like this. Keep going, keep going. University professor, teaching CS, K to 12 educator. Excellent, excellent. Education administrator. Wonderful. And then another brief survey. Just, I always like to know my audience before I start the talk. For how many years have you used Second Life? Um, You can feel free to use fractions. Oh my gosh, the first three are 17, 18, 20, 13. Wow. Okay, and a 1. Okay, there's a 1. Great. That's good to know. Okay, so I wonder if this event brought in the person who just listed a 1 year. I won't put you on the spot here. So lots of long-time users, it seems. That's really good to know. And all right, I'll stop with the survey in a moment here, but how let's go with a 1 to 10 scale. How familiar are you using VR, virtual reality headsets? 10 being you use it all the time, you're really familiar. 5, I see a 5, I see a 0. Couple tens. Okay. Oh, some ones, some threes. Oh, I'm seeing some lower numbers. Interesting. That's not surprising to me. Some zeros. Okay, good to know. So I have a very Second Life literate audience, and some of you are newer to VR, which at first glance, some people might be confused by if they don't know these communities. they might recognize Second Life as the same thing as VR. Indeed, it's referred to as virtual reality in a lot of the literature, even in academic literature, but also in, of course, the news. I need to stand up here so I can fix my camera. So yeah, today I'm very excited to talk to you about mostly my work in virtual worlds in VR. So Second Life is a virtual world, as you all know well, but you can access it on a computer. You cannot access it in VR. It's one of the older virtual worlds. In fact, as you all know well, it was inspired by the concept of the metaverse. Written in 1992 by Neil Stephenson, but built over a decade later by Linden Lab. And so the interface is not the same as a modern VR interface. And I'll talk a bit about some of those differences as we go through my talk. Toward Professor, Hero, Protagonist, Insights from Teaching in VR and Research on Virtual Meetings. I hope if you're all long-time Second Lifers, you probably get the title. And if you're not, I won't explain it. I'll let you. I'll leave the mystery there for a moment. But I'll jump into the background to my thoughts on this subject here, my trajectory. If we were doing this in VR or in a classroom, I'd be able to use animations. So I do apologize that some of these slides are a little bit content heavy when I open them up. And I don't have a laser pointer to point at things, but I'll still take you through them, hopefully in a way that makes sense. So my path to the metaverse, and as you all know well, the metaverse is the inspiration for Second Life, but I don't think we're quite here yet, even though Second Life is 20 plus years old. I think the vision, Neil Stephenson's vision of the metaverse was as a cohesive kind of modern version of the internet where everyone accesses through an immersive hardware device of some sort, including computers, to do their daily internet activities. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. So my inroads really not just to the metaverse itself, but to being interested in the metaverse started as an undergrad where I studied science, technology, and society. It's an interdisciplinary major that they offer at Stanford and a few other universities, but it's not a huge major. That it basically focuses on how those three things mutually influence each other. And that influence between technical stuff and human-like stuff led me to an interest in human-computer interaction, the study of how people are influenced by computer technologies, how people influence their interactions with computers, and the implications of those things psychologically and socially. I read the book The Media Equation. I'm sorry, on the slides it's pretty small. It's that first book in the bottom left, which describes how people respond naturally to computers that exhibit anthropomorphic cues that have some sort of human-like feature. And so that was inspirational for me. I thought, wow, this is such a cool phenomenon. The progenitors being at Stanford, Cliff Nass, my former advisor, and Byron Reeves. Cliff is no longer with us, but Byron's still teaching actually at Stanford. And it's a theory that really changed the field because it illustrates that psychologically, a lot of what happens as people use technologies is not so different from the psychological norms we have for communicating with people. I found that fascinating. I read Snow Crash, as I mentioned, in 2005. It inspired me to want to study virtual reality. I thought, wow, these technologies are actually coming down the line. And one of my advisors, Jeremy Valenson, who wrote the next book right above computer-mediated communication there, called Experiences on Demand, he makes this argument that science fiction gives us a roadmap as social scientists of media technologies. It gives us a roadmap for research questions that we should be asking. And I thought, oh, that's a fascinating idea. I can learn how to carry out my studies in my career as an academic by reading sci-fi. That sounds fun. So that was inspirational for me. The field of computer-mediated communication is not just about how people interact with computers, but how people interact with each other through computers. VR being a technology that allows us to do that, Second Life virtual worlds indeed are, the quintessential format in which we can study these things at a very human-like level, at least presently in our media landscape. And so I've always been a little less interested in text-based social media platforms for computer-mediated communication. I've been more interested in the game-like platforms. And so that interest fits very well with the field of media psychology, which I studied as a PhD student at USC Annenberg, the Annenberg School for Communication. Has a broad range of fields represented. Media psychology is one of them. The field of communication as a whole has many media psychology oriented researchers and faculty members. So really my home is communication. If you're interested in the ways that I talk about some of these subjects today, you might want to check out the International Communication Association or some of other communication oriented research journals, Journal of Communication, Journal of Computer Mediated Communication, or flagship journals from our, where we often take a media psychology perspective on studying the social and psychological approaches to research on technology interaction effects. The SMARTY lab, that's my segue into the lab I run at Michigan State University. I am currently an associate professor there. I've been there since 2012. I come out of many different subfields of media psychology that I represent in that bottom right-hand corner, starting with game studies, looking at how people use and are influenced by the games that they play, avatar effects. Avatars have been a major focus for my research. Virtual meetings, of course, are relevant to the kind of professional uses game-like environments. So here we are having a virtual meeting right now, a virtual conference, which you guys have been doing for decades in this platform. Hearing someone singing. I didn't know my talk was that inspirational yet, but rock on. And I've also studied gender stereotypes in gaming and how those influence people, and the idea of stereotype threat, the idea that when we're reminded of stereotypes, those influence our behaviors. So if you bring people into a room and you remind them of their race or their gender, and there's a stereotype associated with that, that will affect their performance. For example, for math stereotypes, there's an influence based on gender. But this works in avatars too. If you bring people into the lab and you have them use a man or a woman avatar, and we say your score on this math test now with this man or woman avatar is going to be compared across genders. We give you kind of a competition context, a threat context. People who use male avatars or man avatars will perform better on the math test than people who use woman avatars, and that's true for both men and women participants. So we find that avatars can influence people's behaviors in virtual worlds in ways that align with stereotypes. That's a phenomenon that's been studied broadly, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail in this talk. And I've also studied how people interact with social agents and AI. That's a little bit less relevant to this talk, but all of these subjects are very relevant to the idea of teaching in VR, which I've been doing for a while now, and I'll talk in more detail about that in the next few slides. But I just want to kind of point out that all of these bubbles of my experience as a researcher relate to the metaverse in a way that I would have never really expected starting out as a grad student in 2005 and getting excited about Second Life back then. So teaching in VR, I am very fortunate to have been teaching all of my MSU classes in VR since 2022. I currently live in the California Bay Area since 2022, and that means I teach my classes remotely. I'm fortunate to have this deal. It took a series of lucky events on my part. Unfortunately, COVID was part of that. But MSU has given me the deal to keep doing this until at least 2029. So I teach my classes Understanding Virtual Reality and Avatar Psychology in VR. I have about 30 students per class on average, so that means By now, I think I've taught a couple hundred students in VR. I have 100 students, 100 VR headsets in my lab, and my students borrow them for the duration of the semester and usually return them. Most of those are Quest 2s. I do have some Quest 3s. I'm trying to prioritize Quest 3s to the students in the classes I'm teaching. I also lend out VR headsets to students in other classes because there are other faculty in our department who are teaching game development or other aspects of media technology that relate to VR. So I run a VR co-op for the department, and actually all throughout the university, faculty are welcome to borrow headsets from my lab. One pro tip here, I don't know how easily you can see in my slides on the right side there. We've got headsets all over, stored all over, but lunch bags. Pro tip, if you ever want to set up a little VR repository and you don't want them all sitting in those clunky cardboard boxes, and you want students to return them, insulated lunch bags are the way to go. They're inexpensive. They've got sufficient padding. These headsets are made for kids to use and swing around in their living rooms, occasionally smashing the controller into the wall. Hopefully not, though, but that does happen. And so they're relatively sturdy. And the lunch bags we found when I taught one VR class at Stanford, and the students found it much easier to return them when we switched them from boxes to lunch bags. I've always used the lunch bags at MSU, and it's nobody knows you've got a VR headset in there. They think you're carrying your lunch. It fits perfectly. So maybe not the most scientific point of the day, based purely on personal experience, but take that one to the bank. But more importantly, in the virtual world's best practices in education, I'd like to talk a bit about how I learned to structure class in a way that I think is effective. So when we say we teach class in VR, it doesn't mean that we start and end the 80-minute session in VR and stay there the whole time. That would be a little rough, especially for the students who don't have their VR legs. We start in Zoom usually, or another video conferencing platform, and then we chat for a bit. We set up expectations for the day. Sometimes we do activities which require video and audio streaming, which I'm not able to do very easily in the VR platform that I use. So if I need to stream videos that they've made, that's an assignment that I often have them do. I'll ask them to make videos in VR and then post those on a class forum, and those videos illustrate their understanding of a concept, and then we'll watch them as a class, perhaps ironically not in VR. So those are the things that happen while we're in Zoom, but I do like to spend about 40 minutes on average every class in VR. 30-ish minutes seems to be the threshold, especially for new users before they start to feel uncomfortable, simulator sickness, etc., in VR. And so we always allow them to switch from VR to a flat screen device, a computer or a mobile phone, and it's essential, not just because some people start to experience simulator sickness, but for accessibility reasons in general. Right, not everyone can hold two controllers or handle the weight on their head, and so the platforms that I use always have the option to be in VR or in another device, computer or mobile phone. And then the structure of class in VR is usually a mix of large group discussion. I don't lecture like this. If you're in VR, you should be doing things that Jeremy Valenson, my mentor in VR here, calls DICE. He uses DICE as the acronym: dangerous, impossible, counterproductive, or expensive. And so giving you all a lecture like this where we're not interacting, that really doesn't take advantage of the affordances of this technology, the ability to interact socially with so much social presence. So we'll do a large group discussion, but instead of just a lecture, I'll have a platform that I use, Slido, which is kind of like Poll Everywhere, where students paste in prior to entering VR, because using a keyboard in VR is not easy. So prior to being in VR, I'll have them respond to a prompt, a question, such as like, what is a question about the reading you have, or give us a link related to the reading to a news article that is relevant to the subject we're discussing this week. I have them kind of prep those before class as a homework assignment every week. So they're ready to paste those in, so then we can have class discussion where I see their responses on the Slido page. They all see them up in a virtual screen, and I talk to students individually in front of the class, and we have a group discussion about that. The other thing that I like to do, which is extremely effective, probably the most effective thing I do in VR, is small group discussion. It's an essential tool in your pedagogical tool belt. It's especially for active learning. You break students up, think pair shares, one of them, or small groups. I'll have them do little debates if it seems like there's a 50-50 split on a topic. I'll have the small groups illustrate a scene using three-dimensional objects. The platform I use makes it really easy for students to just click through a couple menu items and then spawn a tiger or a shark or a building or a car. They can draw in 3D if they're using a VR headset with two controllers. So they can illustrate a concept from the reading. They can make a scene that we later as a group go into and experience kind of socially, and in a way that helps us understand the psychological implications of what we're talking about, whether that's avatar effects or the ability to use VR for training, or the ability to experience new worlds in VR as field trips and education. So those are some examples of how we teach in VR. There are many logistical challenges. Most of them are easy enough to surmount, I think, especially for me now that I've had some experience with it. So if you're watching this and you're considering teaching in VR and it's daunting at first, yes, there's a learning curve for the educator, but be optimistic. I've been doing it now for 3 years, and it's worked out very well every time. Students love it. They absolutely consistently report wanting to continue taking classes in VR and preferring that over Zoom classes for sure, and some even over in-person classes, I think, but not everyone. I think in-person is still an important standard to hold on to. But okay, so some of those challenges: initial literacy, onboarding is such a pain. Just getting your Guardian set up so people aren't walking into the walls, or they know how to, tell the VR headset where safe ground is. Account management. We use the Meta headsets. Meta doesn't seem to want people to use those headsets because they make it so darn hard to get into the accounts. I get it. They have privacy concerns that they are now focused on more so than perhaps they were in the Facebook days. But that does make onboarding and 1, 2, 3-factor authentication sometimes a bit of a rocky on-road. Novelty, right? Novelty is great. It's one of the reasons we like using these technologies. I don't think it should be the main reason, but in those first few moments when you've got a class of undergrads, especially on the younger end, they get rowdy and they want to play around, and it's fun. It's like they're playing a game. And my main point here is that you should embrace that. Playfulness should be a part of education. I think in general, philosophically, when you see me jumping around the stage, when I teach in person, I stand on a skateboard, I roll from one side to the other to keep students engaged. I try to be playful because when I was a student, I got really bored of professors who didn't keep things engaging. I'm sitting in my chair upside down. I do this in VR, and I can fly around in my chair because it's an object that I can hold and move while I'm sitting in it. So playfulness is important, and I want students to do that too. But of course, you have to balance that against distraction. If some students are just trying to focus and learn, and you have other students who are like making massive Tyrannosaurus Rexes behind the screen that we're focused on, that won't that won't fly, of course. So you have to set some ground rules around being playful in a way that's not distracting. Accessibility, as I mentioned, simulator sickness is a major problem, and it's an equity issue as well. It affects women more than men. It affects newer users more than more seasoned users, and so you just have to offer non-VR options and make sure that you are not grading in a way that makes it hard for people outside of VR to earn that grade. But at the same time, like, you really need to be in VR to do some activities like draw in 3D. So the learning experience is better. So just recognizing that as you take students through teaching in VR is a really important facet of the experience, I think. The unsung villain here is audio. Audio management is such a pain, as you know well from Second Life, right? You've got to click the speak button. You might have trolls. What if some people are in the same room and their mic is picking up each other's mic? And I do some of my classes hybrid, so students come into the classroom and they're there together. Others are at home. We all kind of have a Zoom. There's a classroom Zoom, and then when we're in VR, we have headsets with mics, and the hybrid issue is kind of hell. But there are solutions in a platform that we're building for research. We have a same room check feature where users who are in the same physical room just check a box, and then they can't hear each other. Their mics are shut off for each other. But then they can hear everyone else. I haven't actually seen a platform that does that, a commercial platform. It's in a world that we built within VR Chat for research. I'll mention that briefly later. But I'd just like to point out here that in terms of design, a non-skeuomorphic thinking is needed. Skeuomorphic meaning we take the norms of the physical world or pre-existing media platforms and we apply them in this new platform. And that's why 3D spatial audio seems like such a great solution. Like, hey, when I'm in the real world, I hear people louder if they're close to me. And of course, yeah, that does make sense. And that does seem to kind of work in VR, but there's so much more you can do, right? You can group people based on the need to hear each other, regardless of where you're standing in a virtual environment. And that is, I think, a huge unlock for the ability to have virtual meetings that are effective for teaching or other purposes. And yet we don't see platforms really doing that quite yet. Maybe someone who knows how to build a platform is listening to this talk and they get inspired. Let me know if you want more ideas. We've got a lot of great ideas we're building into this virtual world we're testing as part of our research. Another an intangible threat is privacy. These VR headsets collect a lot of data about where you're looking, how you're moving. They can tell how tall you are, of course, if you're standing up. They can tell if you have medical conditions that relate to tremors or physical body movement. So those types of data are a little bit scary to put in the hands of companies that don't have the best reputation for prioritizing user safety related to data privacy. At the same time, as far as I've seen, Meta, the platforms we use, does try very hard to lock down that data. They don't give it to the app developers in the raw form, so it's hard. It would potentially be harder for app developers to mine that data to get your personal identity and connect it to your advertising sellable profile, which I think is the main problem. So it's an intangible threat right now because we haven't had our Cambridge Analytica event of VR data privacy, but it's probably on the horizon, unfortunately. I think the best solution is to not encourage people to use advertising supported media and instead use media platforms that you pay for so that the company is not forced to go to an advertising supported model, in which case you are the product because you're not paying for it. Or your data is the product. All right, some student feedback on class. Generally, as I mentioned, they love it. They feel more engaged in class discussion. Many of these insights are supported in the survey studies that we've run, which we've run multiple now. as parts of my classes. They appreciate the active spatial learning. It's more interesting than Zoom. They say when they're in Zoom, everyone's just a box. Everything blends together. When they're in VR, they're less likely to multitask because they're more focused on what's happening in the world. Also, there's a computer on their face, so they can't look at their screens, their emails outside of their computer on their face, and so mobile phone distractions are gone. Being able to play other games are gone. I think this is especially useful for people who like to fidget. Maybe they have ADHD. I'm a bit of a fidgeter, as you can tell as I jump around the stage here. Another interesting point my students made, which I've really taken to heart, is that contextual memory is a lot better in VR because when we change the environments, they start to associate the subject of that discussion with the environment. So at the end of the term, I'll always ask them about the list of subjects we learned. And in my VR class, they can always say like, oh yeah, we were under the ocean on that one. We were on the oil rig for that one. We were on the mountaintop for that one. We were on the space station for that one. Like they remember where we were, and that becomes part of their memory castle, right? And so I believe they actually remember content in class discussion better because we are in this 3D spatial environment. There are, of course, many limitations. I've mentioned some already. If they have a computer on their face, they can't see their other screens or pen and paper, so taking notes is harder. Tailored experiential learning. If I want my students to dissect a frog, that's easy. I just did that simulation with them. A jet engine, yeah, I've seen that one too, but maybe if I want them to interact with a certain historical figure that might not exist yet. So finding that type of content is difficult. I used to think that would be a major bottleneck. I'm less pessimistic these days because there are some great AI tools coming into play right now where you can generate your own AI agents to speak with students. Or you can build virtual environments with AI very quickly. So I imagine the content bottleneck is opening up slowly but surely over the last year. I've seen that. The learning curve, as I mentioned, is a challenge. So embrace playfulness and take your time. I wouldn't say that VR is a great solution if you're only going to use it once for like a 20-minute session in your class, because you'll never get past that novelty experience or that learning curve. Audio management also, as I mentioned a bit already. So my fundamental conclusion about teaching in VR is that with VR you can teach anything. Maybe, if not anything, many things. Pretty much any subject in which you can focus on active learning and class discussion as your method of pedagogy. It works much better for the flipped classroom than it does for a context in which you're trying to actively just teach them one way, sage on a stage, like I'm doing here. And I'm so sorry to be doing this because I really prefer interactive learning in general. But I think VR is excellent for that. Why? Because people experience more presence. This is a psychological concept that we've studied in the field for a few decades now with respect to VR, but also other media technologies. VR augments the sense of spatial presence, the sense that you're there, you feel like you're in the spatial environment. Spatial presence has also been described as the perceptual illusion of non-mediation. That's one of my favorite definitions from Lombard and Ditton. There are more complex definitions as well, such as experiencing artificial objects as if they are sensorially there with you. Regardless of your definition, I think, intuitively you get it. Like feeling present in a virtual environment is much higher when there's a face computer that uses tracking, rendering, and display to make you feel like you're really there. But perhaps more important in the teaching context is social presence, the feeling that you're there with other people. I feel that right now with you all as you're floating out on these rafts, as I move around in this avatar and feel like I can jump and I'm connected to it. But in VR, if I had both of my hands, if I could teleport easily and walk up to you, if I could high five you and feel that vibration in my hand and you feel it in your hand at the same time as we're talking, I think that leads to even more social presence. And that's the secret sauce right there. That is what we find in our research leads to increased perceived learning, increased perceived competence and enjoyment for students in classes. The last one, presence, though, is self-presence, that feeling that you are your avatar. And actually, in the VR environments we use, they're not quite there yet. Self-presence takes a lot of fine-tuning. People want to customize their avatar to make it self-similar. That leads to a sense of identification. You also need to feel like your body is extended, that sense of embodiment into the avatar for self-presence. And so embodiment is easier in VR, but identification is a little bit harder, especially in the platforms we use that are more professionally oriented. So unlike Second Life, they don't have quite as many options for self-representation. Self-presence might actually be higher in Second Life on the identity level than it is in many of the VR platforms. Not on the embodiment level, in my opinion, and I think the research would support that, but maybe on the identity level. Regardless of all of these experiences of presence increase the engagement in class, which leads to more content retention and enjoyment. And so I am obviously pro teaching in VR. I don't think it should replace teaching in person. I think it should complement it. I live in California, but I do go to Michigan every semester, once or twice, to see my students and set up my lab studies. I talk to my students all the time. Like if I can't be there in person, I use many media of communication to talk with my advisees about their research projects, their dissertations, etc. So I don't think VR is a single solution. I don't think any media platform really is in order to be a good educator, but I think it's a very useful one for these contexts. And last but not least, right, like your pedagogy should match your platform. I often think of the TPAC model. Many of you know that technology, pedagogy, and content. You need those three areas of knowledge, and you need to merge them in a way that makes sense for the context of your educational environment. So yeah, I often think about how the technology of VR needs to match the content that I'm teaching and the pedagogical approaches that I take. All right, so I'm not just an instructor, I'm also a researcher. We might, in academia, even say that research is the bigger part of the job. The publication is the currency of at least the tenure track realm. And so I've done a lot of research on contexts of teaching and of using avatars otherwise in professional ways that are relevant to the educational environments. But I'm going to just start off with a paper that's not mine here. I'm sorry, the text is really small on these slides. If we were in VR, I could give you all your own individual screen. I don't know if you're able to do that. But in Oogie Han and colleagues, Oogie's one of Jeremy Bailenson recent advisees. She's going off to be a professor at the University of Florida. Did a study, this one, People, Places, and Time, a longitudinal study of group interaction in the metaverse. It published in the Journal of Computer Mediated Communication, as I mentioned, one of our top journals in the field, in which they studied their class that they taught during COVID with Stanford students, hundreds of Stanford students. It's arguably the first large VR class ever taught, almost fully in VR, and they had their students complete surveys regularly, and that project has led and is still leading to many very valuable insights for the field. It inspired me to start teaching in VR. I used the model of teaching that they used, and of course I've tweaked it to make it my own, but I use the same virtual platform called Engage. I use some similar activities that they innovated on there. And so what did they find? They switched environments, and they looked at different types of environments for class discussion, and they found that in larger spaces with longer sight lines, especially when those environments had nature in them, like trees, like this one here, lovely palm trees and and water, students tend to learn better. They felt a little bit more engaged. And the reasoning behind that relates to kind of the psychological implications of feeling, relaxed in a natural environment, but also feeling engaged, because when there are long sight lines, you have to stay aware, right? You are not secluded and hidden. So that's a little bit of the psychology behind that finding. The next study I'll mention is the first study that we've nearly published. I'm sorry I can't send this one to you yet, but it's very close. It's in its final round of review, and they've all been positive reviews, so I'm optimistic it will be published soon. And the fundamental conclusion is pretty unassailable. I'm certain we'll publish it because we found it in other contexts as well, comparing Zoom to asynchronous classes, for example. But in this study, we compared my VR classes to Zoom, essentially the amount of time we spent in VR versus the amount of time we spent in Zoom in a class meeting. Of course, those two things are inversely related because we would just switch between VR and Zoom. And the more time we spent in VR, the more social presence students felt, and the more social presence they felt, the more enjoyment and engagement and perceived learning they reported as well. And so the fundamental conclusion there is, VR is better for student learning than Zoom is, but up to a point. And that's one of the fine points that we're tweaking in our final revisions here of that study, is how do we know when to stop, right? We also know the more time people spend in VR, the more fatigue they feel, and there seems to be an inflection point, curvilinear relationship between time in VR and those benefits. But there seems to be a huge variance. For some people, they can spend many hours in VR and not really hit that peak benefit time, right? They are the VR natives. I've got one student who told me he spent 18 hours straight in VR. I mean, with bathroom breaks, but that's a lot. Versus other students who are brand new, like they can make it no more than 20 minutes and they start to feel a little bit ill. So yeah, so parsing that out for the paper is one of our goals in the next steps here. Another study that my advisee, Cheyenne Lim, pictured there in the bottom right, recently first authored with our research team, found that people reported higher customization valuation, right? How much would you be willing? I mean, you guys all know this well if you're Second Life users. How many Linden dollars or real dollars really would you be willing to spend for your avatar's T-shirt or face or outfit in general in a workplace setting? And we found that valuation to be higher for women than men, and for non-white users than white users, and for people who reported more Zoom fatigue. And so the implication is that avatar customization is a means of impression management, and in the workplace where there are unequal norms for impression management based on gender and race, then people who kind of feel that pressure more recognize that it's more valuable to them and would be willing to spend more. And with Zoom fatigue, we've done research on Zoom fatigue. In one of our studies, we found that people who have more self-consciousness about their face, the more they dislike their own face appearance, the more Zoom fatigue they report feeling. And this is explained by the idea of kind of hyper self-consciousness caused by seeing your own camera in the virtual environment, or well, the Zoom environment, I should say. And so that self-view leads to self-consciousness, especially for people who don't like their own face. And so for them, an avatar is a way of controlling that self-presentation, right? And so they're willing to pay more for an avatar in that context. It's an impression management tool. So those are a couple studies. And now I'll talk about another relevant area of research, the Proteus effect. This is my one true theoretical love. I like to joke. I've been studying it for most of my time in academia. It's the basic phenomenon that people act consistently with their avatar's characteristics, unknowingly. It's a subconscious effect. So when we give people avatars in virtual environments, oh, did I click? I didn't click yet. There we go. When we give people avatars in virtual environments that have certain characteristics, the users will act consistently with those characteristics. If they use a taller avatar, they'll negotiate more aggressively. They'll choose a more favorable economic split in an economic split task when they're using the taller avatar. If they use a more attractive avatar, they'll have more social confidence. They'll stand closer to people in the virtual environment, and they'll choose more attractive dating partners on a dating website afterwards for themselves. If they see their avatar and as an older version of self, they'll choose a more conservative investment portfolio. If their avatar gains or loses weight while exercising or eating food, that will influence how much they exercise in the real world afterward, and how much candy they eat from the bowl in the survey while they're taking the survey in the survey room, sitting there on the table next to them. My favorite one is if people, and this one was done in Second Life actually. If people see themselves in an avatar that's wearing inventor type clothing, you know, a lab coat and a clipboard, compared to casual clothing, the inventor avatar users come up with more creative ideas in a brainstorming task. That study's been done a few times. Overall, the Proteus effect, these avatar effects, have been found in over 50 studies. I've helped to run multiple meta-analyses on this research. We find it's a relatively strong effect, especially for a media effect. And we find that it tends to be even stronger in VR than it is in flat screen computer based studies. So yeah, that's I think a promising area. Like, how do we harness that effect to increase educational outcomes, desirable educational outcomes like student engagement and learning and participation. It's not as easy as it looks, or as it might sound intuitively. I did one study where I had students make actual self versus ideal student avatars. I guess I'm still on the pretty side. Actual self versus ideal student avatars. And I found actually that the actual self avatar users did better on class exams than the ideal student avatars. Maybe because student ideals were not focused on studiousness, or maybe because the ideal student was too ideal and they felt like there was a large discrepancy. We would call that a self discrepancy between the avatar, the ideal avatar, and the actual self, making it kind of feel unachievable. But in any case, yeah, using the Proteus effect in order to enhance educational outcomes has been a consistent goal in my research. Um, Moving on from research to outreach a little bit, though research related, here are some initiatives from my lab and my work that I think I hope are accessible to you all. And I'm running out of time here. I do want some time for questions. We're running a VR game jamathon. So if you want to encourage your students to participate in this jamathon, it's in May. Just go to vrjamathon.org. I hope that link works. I just set it up yesterday. But basically, you don't need coding skills. You go into this VR world and you make a game using the tools that we've developed. And you can work over those 10 days with your team, and then at the Meaningful XR conference, which is the next bullet there, we will announce the winners and do the award ceremony. That's at UC Davis, but there's also a remote option, accessible in VR or non-VR, and that's a conference we're running for the second time now. Did it at Stanford last year, and it's academics and industry and educators focused on XR. It's very relevant to this conference. And last but not least, my Avatar Summer School I'm launching this summer. I want to start teaching about VR, kind of like this talk. Actually, I might take this talk, which I made for you guys, and lead with that for the Avatar Summer School for this Intro to XR in Education and Society. We'll be doing 4 2-hour class meetings in a virtual world platform that's accessible on other hardware as well, and it's really designed for educators but open to the public, and it's part of a nonprofit I'm starting called the Avatars International Institute of Technology, and we'll see if that ever turns into an initiative beyond just the Avatar Summer School, but I have a crazy vision of doing a class, a whole university in VR. Who knows if it'll ever happen? But please feel free to apply for that. Space is limited, so there are applications for that one. And thank you so much for your time. And if you have questions, I hope there's still some time for that. I might have gone a few minutes over.
No, thank you so much. This was great. I think we need to give Robbie a big round of applause. It was very interesting, and I'm going to go back and look at the stream and take a bunch of your suggestions myself for my classes. We don't have much time, but I did want to ask one question that we got. How do you create accessibility for hearing and impaired slash deaf people?
Oh, yeah. So there are captioning tools that we can use in some platforms. Um, I have not had a student ask me about that specifically yet. So I actually haven't had to do it yet, but I do know there are tools that we could use. There are also modes of sign language in VR, but I'm also not super familiar with those. Just like with early computing, unfortunately, accessibility tools tend to come after experimentation with kind of the the stabilization of the platform. So there's certain modes of user interaction that we're not really sure whether they're going to stick around or not yet. But we are increasingly seeing those tools, and yeah, I'm always really ready to support students with their accessibility needs as soon as they raise them. I just haven't had them yet.
So in VR chat, there is a whole group of people who are creating tools exactly like you were talking about, for use in VR chat, that are things that will take a speech and turn it into a bubble over an avatar's head, or
Hmm.
they have actual what's called virtual sign language, which is a way to map ASL onto VR controllers, which
Yeah.
is
Oh, wow.
pretty amazing as well. I can send you the link to it if you're ever interested in going to see
Oh,
it.
I am super interested. Yeah, and I'm curious how that controller-based ASL relates to hand tracking-based sign language in VR as well.
Right, right.
Hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to give you another hand. Thank you so much for doing this presentation for us, and I really appreciate it. I know you've been around for 18 or 19 years yourself, so
It's
in
been a
Second
while though
Life.
since I've been in Second Life. This was a wonderful excuse to get back into it and relearn some of those literacies. And of course, please feel free to reach out. All of my links are on the slide right here. Uh, thank you all for being here.